a vinda do Peter Joseph aqui ao Brasil, pelo menos para mim pessoalmente, tem uma dupla função pedagógica. Primeiro, poder dar relevo a essa discussão sobre as novas tecnologias da informação e da comunicação na perspectiva da mobilização política e da transformação social. Eu acho que o fenômeno que ocorre hoje no meio no que diz respeito às mudanças, né, no mundo árabe, na Espanha, enfim, em várias partes do mundo, tem a ver diretamente com a apropriação social desses recursos, dessas novas tecnologias. Sobre esse aspecto, eu acho que o Peter Joseph tem uma importante contribuição a trazer para a gente em relação a essas estratégias que são difundidas pelos novos canais de informação e da comunicação. E segundo, a pensar exatamente o ofício do cinema e do audiovisual na contemporaneidade, né? Ou seja, pensando na perspectiva de que nós estamos diante de novos modelos de organização, de produção, de formas de registro e gravação, de escoamento na nossa produção audiovisual, e isso, sem dúvida alguma, altera as nossas formas de fazer e experimentar a cultura, de fazer e experimentar o audiovisual. Então, sobre esse aspecto, eu acho que também a presença do Peter Joseph está plenamente justificada. A Cúpula Mundial da Sociedade da Informação estabelece claramente em seus princípios não apenas o direito, mas a necessidade que todas as sociedades têm de compartilhar, de ter acesso à informação, de produzir e distribuir informação. Então, acho que o pano de fundo nesse processo, Peter, talvez seja exatamente a apropriação social da informação, que eu acho que esse talvez seja a principal transformação que nós estamos vivendo hoje na contemporaneidade.
Para o Peter, outra pergunta, eu prefiro um dele, pronto aqui, que é o seguinte: considerando o objetivo central do movimento Zeitgeist, que é dar início a uma transição da cultura atual para um novo paradigma econômico sustentável, como você enxerga o papel do Brasil neste processo, visto que o país, embora cheio de pobreza e com graves problemas estruturais, começa a alcançar um novo patamar como player global no cenário político e econômico, mas implementa hoje políticas públicas desenvolvimentistas que obedecem ao modelo do século XX, como a política cambial sob parâmetros do mercado financeiro internacional, projetos de matrizes energéticas baseados em construção de enormes usinas hidrelétricas na Amazônia, construção de várias usinas nucleares e na exploração do pré-sal, que é uma vasta camada de petróleo que colocará o Brasil como um dos maiores produtores de petróleo no mundo. Eu queria saber se o Peter podia comentar as expectativas, o que ele espera da visão dele de um país que está nesse processo de inserção como um player importante global, e isso sendo implementado politicamente através de um governo federal, um projeto desse sentido, que tem inclusive grande aprovação popular.
Thank you. With respect to the way I see Brazil in this context, as far as this change that needs to occur from a social level, from a political level, economic level, from a philosophical level, of course, I don't see Brazil any different than any other country. Every country is in the same basic position. However, Latin America and South America have done very well to detach themselves a little bit, at least now, not always. The very fact that the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank exist, and for some strange reason all the countries of the world recognize this institution and are willing to take loans from it, goes to show how indoctrinated the entire planet has become by this monetary cancer, which is what I call it, where we have a cancer in society, and no state, no country is immune to this. As I would say with any country, it really has to come from a grassroots level at the beginning, because I have zero confidence in any political establishment at this point because of everything I've seen in history. Even the most well-meaning politician, once he gets into the position and association with all other players in government, which are also players of business and corporations inherently, they become nullified in their pursuits. And you see this again historically. So many wonderful leaders. And if they are not corrupted, then they will be removed. You saw this with Allende, you saw this in Chile, you saw this in Panama, you saw the attempted coup of Chavez in Venezuela. Anyone that doesn't play this game is on the list to be removed or character assassinated. Anything they can do. So it has to come from the grassroots level. Again, I have very little confidence in the state as an entity in its current operation, which is an extension of economy. So policy-wise, as you asked, it's very difficult for me to say. I could say many things about what could be done to help people. For example, I recommended this in a lecture I did recently in America. Of course, it's never going to happen, but if the US government or any government cared about their unemployment problems and their citizenry, they would create a mandate and they would subsidize their most dominant corporations to cut the workday in half, and then they would allow for double the population to be employed. That's a very logical, rational thought. In fact, it was proposed in 1930 in the administration of Roosevelt during the Great Depression. Of course, it was booted then as well. There's no reason to this, and everything you attempt to do within this system to combat it is like fighting the current in an ocean. You can keep trying to push the waves back, but they keep going around you. So I will reiterate that it's going to take all of you at a grassroots level to have the courage to create a presence, a strength that the political establishment can't ignore and will eventually recognize and eventually be pushed into fundamental changes and then eventually broad changes. And that is, as simple as that sounds, as difficult as that might sound, as unprecedented as that is, I see the only solution as a global grassroots revolution, peaceful, that works to combat this cancer that is eroding the fabric of all of our societies. No country excluded, no country in any other privileged position than another.
Quais são suas principais e quais foram, né, suas principais referências em termos de literatura, filosofia e até musicais para produzir o seu filme, para produzir esse modo de pensar? E a outra curiosidade é com relação ao off que aparece no primeiro trecho da parte 1, que a gente suspeitou que fosse de Krishnamurti. Seria?
And you mean Zeitgeist Addendum?
Mm-hmm.
Krishnamurti, right? Yes. Yes, Jiddu Krishnamurti has been an influence. He's a wonderful speaker, a philosopher. I like him because he asks questions to the audience. He doesn't impose himself. His lectures are not lectures at all. They're questions. And he presents questions over and over again. But then he keeps asking questions. Very active mentally. Big influence, Jiddu Krishnamurti, absolutely. As far as my musical and film influences or writing influences, probably the core philosophical influence I've had is Carl Sagan, an American astronomer and science writer. Excuse me. He's very prolific, and he's not alive anymore, but he was very prolific. I recommend him. I'm sure a number of his books have been translated into Portuguese. But he, by far, out of everyone that I've read, he is sort of the hub of what I reference back to as far as what it means to be in line with nature. As far as music and film, there's actually a 20th century composer named Ioannis Xenakis. Are you familiar with Xenakis? Ioannis Xenakis was a freedom fighter in Europe. I want to say Czechoslovakia, but I could be wrong. He lost his eye in civil war in the early 20th century, no, late 19th century actually. He died a number of years ago. But he wrote his book, his master thesis was Art, Science, Alloys, which was a beautiful intellectual work. It wasn't social, but it was about how art and science combine. He was famous for taking musical works that he would construct electronically through mathematical algorithms and building them. He would convert his music to architecture and vice versa. Very brilliant philosophical man. In his work, Art, Science, Alloys, he discussed about unifying the world through sound with these gigantic sirens. And it was a very strange but very profound concept. So he was very influential on me in the way I look at art and its role, the way I look at science and its role, and how they intermesh. I mean, I could ramble on about other people that have been influential on me, but those are core ones that I think, if anyone here is interested in those views, I would recommend. Gio Krishnamurti was a wonderful figure to have in there. Obviously, I'm influenced by Jacques Fresco. He was very important a number of years ago to my own development and building upon all of that work with Carl Sagan. I'm also a big fan of Stephen Hawking and all the great thinkers. Ray Kurzweil is very fascinating. I'm always watching what's happening. And historically speaking, you know, the more social the artists become, and the more you see it manifest in their art form, and that's what's very interesting to me. Like J.S. Bach is my biggest influence musically. The first thing I ever did as a student was produce an album of his music. His music to me represented this sort of this iteration of thought, which relating to very finite physics of sound, with the 12-tone temperament of the scale that we use. It's very, very interesting to me, and it is deep inside of my work. So, I mean, it's a big intermesh and symbiosis. And I'm an amalgam of many different people. I will definitely state that, as we all are.